on corn are having a deadly effect on his bees.
Why do we have to add chemicals to get that extra 10%? At the cost of who knows whatever. So it's the biggest, highest volume scenario that seems to be first, and never mind the smaller segments of agriculture.
Most of the bigger pesticide companies are members of a trade association called CropLife. Pierre Patel is the chemistry director at CropLife Canada.
This is a relatively modern class of insecticides that have gone through all the regulatory approvals here in Canada and elsewhere in the world, and they target insects. So this particular class of insecticides, the advantage of it is that it has very low toxicity for wildlife and humans.
It was designed to replace the older classes of insecticides that were found to be toxic to mammals and birds as well.
Neonicotinoids are an insecticide. That's what they do, is kill insects.
But even though these insecticides were designed only to attack the nervous systems of invertebrates, Armstrong handles the seed with caution.
Any kind of pesticides I handle with gloves. The proper handling of them is the job of equipment manufacturers, the job of the farmer, and the job of the corn companies.
There's no argument that pesticides could harm honeybees, but that's only if they're exposed, says CropLife's Pierre Patel.
When you look at just the hazard of this product, if an insect is exposed to it, beneficial or not, it can be hazardous to that insect. The other part of a risk equation, though, is exposure. And so if you are not exposed to that hazardous compound, then your risk is minimal. I've used the example of electricity. So when it's flowing through an extension cord, there's no risk to you. But as soon as you cut that extension cord and touch those wires, it poses a significant risk.
But last spring, beekeepers in some parts of Canada found their bees were dying in record numbers. When Health Canada analyzed dead and dying bees, they found neonicotinoids on 70% of them.
The acute incidents from last spring were definitely attributable to insecticide exposure, and we've taken measures to mitigate that.
Scott Kirby is the Director of Product Assessment for Health Canada's Pest Management Agency.
We had never received that level of incident reports with respect to bees before. And these pesticides have been registered for over a decade. So with respect to last spring, as I said, we know that the neonicotinoids were likely a contributing factor, but also things like the weather were as well.
Health Canada had raised questions about a potential risk to honeybees when they first registered neonicotinoids in 2004. As a condition of registration, additional information was requested from pesticide companies. But Health Canada recently informed CBC News that the studies did not fully address all outstanding questions about risks to pollinators. And after 9 years of planting the treated seeds in Canada, additional information has been requested. But since last spring's unprecedented bee mortality incidents, one route of exposure is almost certain.
The corn seed is an irregular shape, and so it doesn't always flow through the seed unit very effectively.
To help the corn seed move through the planter, farmers apply a fine talcum powder.
When they go through the seed, some of the neonicotinoid comes off of the seed and is absorbed into the talc. And it's the talc, the excess talc is what goes through the system and is eventually exhausted out into the atmosphere.
This so-called fugitive dust, that's part of the regular soil dust suspended in the field, is now considered by Health Canada and others to be the likely cause of the acute bee deaths last spring.
It seems to me like this dust is just going everywhere, killing everything in sight, and there are basically no bugs anywhere anymore.
What beekeepers like John Van Blyderveen had been observing anecdotally for a few years has been addressed in Health Canada's new pollinator protection policy. This spring, farmers were asked to try and keep the dust down and to avoid planting on windy, dry days. Also, they should know where beehives are located. beekeepers were asked to send samples of their dead bees to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, where they would be analyzed.
I'm going to put them in my freezer, and that supposedly keeps them in the best shape we can till they get picked up tomorrow to be analyzed.
Meanwhile, insecticide companies are experimenting with new products to try and reduce the levels of airborne neonicotinoids during planting.
Those companies have been investing in research and improving the technology that adheres that seed treatment to the seed over the past several years. And the other factor that was identified as a potential issue is the use of talc. So they use a fine talc to help the seeds flow through the seeding equipment, and that's a very dusty product. And so there's a talc replacement being tested throughout North America this year, and initial results are very promising and shows a significant reduction in the amount of dust being generated. And that product will likely be available for full-scale use as of next year.
While the European Union has temporarily banned the products, Health Canada is re-evaluating neonicotinoids to see how honeybees are affected when they collect pollen from field corn and flowering crops containing systemic insecticides.
Well, the reevaluation is very complicated. It involves a number of factors, and it's expected to take several years. But during that process, we're continually receiving additional information, new studies, incident reports, and at any time, if the information we look at warrants it, that we can take regulatory action.
For John Van Blyderveen, the time for reviews and research is over.
So normally this tree would be just totally humming with bees at this stage because these blossoms all need pollinating. And this is extremely unusual for this being a bee farm. There's no bees here. It really hit home yesterday when I was working a bee yard and sitting beside a hive, and there's a tree 6 feet over, and it's up here, and it's basically like this, only it's lower to the ground. In fact, I could smell the pollen and nectar, and I'm going, how come I'm not hearing bees? Because I had a row of beehives there, but they weren't very good shape, and so they weren't foraging. And so, you know, you're in a bee yard, you're supposed to hear bees. It's just not right at all. Silence.
Most of the changes that are going on in farming are simply more precise farming, more precision farming has been going on. The better placement of pesticides, the better placement of fertilizers, the more efficient use of those. Isaac Asimov has a great quote that I like, which is, I'm paraphrasing here, but it goes something like, the only solution for technology is more technology. And unfortunately, that's the way the world works. We don't go back, and we move forward instead.